What if everything you think you know about the journey between death and rebirth is based on misunderstanding? Here's the paradox that haunts even serious students of Tibetan Buddhism. The Bardo Thodol, often called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is one of the most quoted spiritual texts in the Western world. Yet it remains one of the most profoundly misinterpreted. We praise it, we reference it, we claim to understand its wisdom, but the actual teachings have been buried under layers of New Age romanticism, Hollywood dramatization, and well-intentioned but fundamentally flawed translations. If you're seeking authentic understanding of what Tibetan masters actually taught about the intermediate states of consciousness, if you want to separate spiritual truth from cultural mythology, then subscribe now and activate notifications. Because today we're dismantling 7 persistent lies that have distorted one of Buddhism's most profound teachings. The Bardo Thodol was never intended as a book about death alone. This revelation might surprise you, but according to scholars like Thupten Jinpa, who has served as the principal translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama since 1985, the text is fundamentally a manual for living with awareness. The word bardo itself translates as intermediate state, and while it certainly applies to the period between death and rebirth, it equally describes every transitional moment in human existence. When you move from sleeping to waking, you traverse a bardo. When you shift from one thought to another, you experience a bardo. The teaching encompasses 6 distinct bardos, not just the 3 post-death states that popular culture obsesses over. This first lie, that the Bardo Thodol is exclusively a guide for the dying, has prevented countless seekers from accessing its practical wisdom for daily transformation. Let me share something that might fundamentally shift your understanding. The treasure text attributed to Padmasambhava and revealed by Karma Lingpa in the 14th century was designed for a very specific purpose within the Nyingma tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. It was meant to be read aloud to someone recently deceased, guiding their consciousness through the bewildering visions and experiences of the after-death state. But here's what gets lost in translation. The text assumes the listener already has extensive training in Vajrayana practices, particularly in deity yoga, and the recognition of mind's true nature. Without this foundation, the elaborate descriptions of peaceful and wrathful deities, the intricate instructions for recognizing the clear light of death, and the navigation through the bardo of becoming would be like handing someone an advanced physics textbook when they haven't yet learned basic mathematics. The second lie is that anyone can simply read the Bardo Thodol and benefit from it without proper preparation and initiation into the practices it references. Consider this carefully. When Longchen Rabjam, the supreme authority on Dzogchen teachings, discussed the nature of mind and the recognition of Rigpa, he emphasized that intellectual understanding alone accomplishes nothing. The Great Perfection tradition, which forms the philosophical foundation for much of the Bardo Thodol, requires direct introduction to awareness from a qualified master. This isn't spiritual elitism. It's practical recognition that certain states of consciousness cannot be conceptually grasped. They must be experientially realized. The third lie propagated in popular spirituality is that the Bardo teachings offer a kind of spiritual insurance policy, a cosmic cheat sheet you can memorize to guarantee a good rebirth or even liberation at the moment of death. This completely misunderstands how karma, merit, and mental habituation actually function in Buddhist philosophy. Have you ever noticed how modern interpretations of the Bardo often sound like a psychedelic journey report? Bright lights, geometric patterns, encounters with archetypal beings, the dissolution of ego boundaries. While there are certainly parallels, and scholars like Stanislav Grof have explored these connections, the fourth lie is that the Bardo experience is essentially a naturally occurring altered state, similar to what might be induced by entheogens or extreme meditation. What Tibetan masters actually describe is far more nuanced. According to the Kangyur and Tengyur, the canonical collections of Buddhist scripture and commentaries, the visions and experiences of the Bardo are not hallucinations imposed on a passive consciousness. They are the spontaneous manifestation of your own mind's karmic propensities, the projections of habitual patterns accumulated over lifetimes. Padmasambhava taught that recognizing these appearances as your own mind's display is the key to liberation, but this recognition is not the same as the detached observation encouraged in psychedelic therapy. It requires the specific application of Vajrayana view, meditation, and conduct. If you found these revelations challenging to your previous understanding, leave a comment below sharing which misconception surprised you most. This kind of dialogue helps all of us deepen our comprehension. Now we arrive at perhaps the most commercially exploited distortion. The fifth lie is that the peaceful and wrathful deities described in the Bardo Thodol are actual supernatural beings you will encounter, entities with independent existence waiting to judge, guide, or terrorize you in the afterlife. This fundamentally contradicts the Madhyamaka philosophy of emptiness taught by Nagarjuna and elaborated by Tsongkhapa. All phenomena, including deities, are empty of inherent existence. They arise dependently based on causes and conditions. In the context of Bardo, these 100 peaceful and wrathful deities represent aspects of your own enlightened nature. The wrathful deities are not demons or angry gods. They symbolize the transformative power of wisdom that destroys ignorance. The peaceful deities embody the qualities of awakened compassion and clarity. When the text instructs you to recognize Mahotara Haruka, or Vajra Krodasvari, it's not telling you to identify external beings. It's directing you to recognize manifestations of your own Buddha nature, appearing in forms your culturally conditioned mind can process. Pema Chödrön, in her teachings on working with difficult emotions, often reminds students that what we resist persists. This applies profoundly to the Bardo experience. The sixth lie is that you can somehow strategize your way through the intermediate states, that with enough preparation and memorization, you can maintain control and navigate toward a favorable outcome. This assumes a solid, continuing self that journeys through the Bardo, making choices and directing its course. But Buddhist philosophy fundamentally rejects this notion of a permanent, unchanging soul. What continues is not a self, but a stream of consciousness shaped by karmic propensities. The Bardo experience unfolds according to the momentum of your accumulated actions, speech, and thought. Your best preparation is not memorizing the sequence of deity appearances. It's cultivating wisdom, compassion, and ethical conduct throughout your life. It's developing stability in meditation practice so that recognition can occur spontaneously when habitual reference points dissolve. Let me be direct about something controversial. The seventh lie, perhaps the most dangerous one, is that the Bardo Thodol offers a kind of universal map of the death process applicable to all humans, regardless of their spiritual tradition or lack thereof. This is absolutely false. The experiences described are specific to individuals who have engaged in particular Buddhist practices, who have received empowerments in the Vajrayana tradition, and who have trained their minds in specific visualization and recognition techniques. Someone from a completely different cultural and religious background will not necessarily experience peaceful and wrathful deities derived from Indo-Tibetan Buddhist iconography. Their death process will be shaped by their own karmic propensities, their own cultural conditioning, their own spiritual development or lack of it. The Bardo Thodol is not describing objective reality that everyone experiences. It's describing the specific landscape that appears to a mind trained in Tibetan Buddhist methods. This doesn't diminish its value. It actually enhances it by reminding us that these are profound practical instructions for a specific path, not vague universal truths divorced from practice and lineage. If this understanding resonates with you, click the like button. It helps more people discover these authentic teachings. So what are we left with once we strip away these 7 lies? We discover something far more valuable than an exotic travel guide to the afterlife. We find a teaching about the nature of mind itself, about how perceptions arise and dissolve, about the possibility of recognizing awareness in the midst of radical transition. The authentic Bardo teaching, as transmitted by masters like Yongey Rinpoche in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, emphasizes that every moment of life is an opportunity to practice the recognition that will serve you in death. When you sit in meditation and watch thoughts arise and dissolve without grasping or rejecting them, you're training in Bardo recognition. When you experience the micro-deaths of ego dissolution that occur in moments of genuine surrender or unexpected change, you're rehearsing for the actual dissolution process. Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, who combines traditional Tibetan training with neuroscientific understanding, teaches that the nature of mind described in Dzogchen is not a mystical abstraction. It's the basic awareness present in every moment of experience, usually obscured by conceptual overlay and emotional reactivity. The panic attacks he experienced as a child and learned to transform through meditation gave him direct insight into how quickly our mental state can shift, how terrifying the dissolution of familiar reference points feels, and how recognition of awareness itself provides a stable ground even in psychological chaos. This is exactly the skill the Bardo Thodol aims to develop, the ability to remain present and recognize the nature of mind even when all familiar landmarks disappear. Let's talk about practical application, because authentic Dharma always translates into lived experience. You don't need to wait for death to work with Bardo teachings. Every time you fall asleep, you pass through the Bardo of dying as your waking consciousness dissolves. Every dream is a rehearsal for the Bardo of becoming, where mental projections appear as convincing reality. Every time you wake, you experience the Bardo of birth as a new day's consciousness crystallizes. The Dzogchen master Longchen Rabjam emphasized that recognizing the dream state as a dream while still dreaming is essential training. This practice, called dream yoga, directly prepares you for the recognition required in the after-death bardos. But here's the key point he stressed. Don't make this complicated. Don't turn it into an elaborate project of the ego seeking spiritual achievement. Simple, consistent practice of resting in natural awareness exactly as you are right now is the most profound preparation. Contemporary neuroscience has begun exploring what Tibetan Buddhism has taught for centuries about the plasticity of consciousness and the constructed nature of perceived reality. Researchers like Catherine Kerr have investigated how meditation practice changes the brain's processing of sensory information and emotional stimuli. While we must be careful not to reduce spiritual teachings to neuroscientific findings, there is something validating about discovering that contemplative traditions accurately mapped territory that science is only beginning to explore. The Bardo teachings describe in precise detail how consciousness functions when separated from the stable platform of embodied existence, how quickly mental states fluctuate, how perception constructs reality moment by moment. This isn't supernatural revelation. It's the fruit of centuries of introspective investigation by highly trained minds. Here's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama emphasizes in his contemporary teachings. Buddhism must engage with modernity without losing its essence. The Bardo Thodol shouldn't be treated as a sacred relic to be preserved in amber. It should be understood in its proper context, its instructions tested through practice, its insights integrated with contemporary understanding of psychology and consciousness. The fear of death that motivates much interest in Bardo teachings is itself a topic worthy of investigation. Why are we so terrified of the unknown? What solid self do we imagine will be threatened by death? Examining these questions directly, through meditation and philosophical reflection, is more valuable than accumulating conceptual knowledge about what happens after we die. Stay with me because we're approaching the most liberating insight. The ultimate purpose of Bardo teaching, according to the Nyingma tradition from which it originates, is not to give you information about death. It's to wake you up to the nature of reality right now. Shantideva wrote in the Bodhicharyavatara that all the suffering and fear we experience comes from grasping at a self that doesn't exist and rejecting experiences we find unpleasant. The peaceful and wrathful deities of the Bardo represent the totality of experience, pleasant and unpleasant, attractive and terrifying, all equally empty, all equally the display of mind's natural radiance. When you can recognize this in meditation, when you can remain present with difficult emotions without being overwhelmed, when you can appreciate joy without clinging to it, you're accomplishing the essential Bardo practice. Think about the times in your life when everything fell apart, when the structures you relied on for security and identity crumbled. Illness, relationship endings, career failures, the death of loved ones. These are Bardo experiences, transitions between one state and another, where the outcome is uncertain and the familiar has dissolved. How did you meet those moments? With panic and grasping, with denial? Or were you able to find some quality of presence, some capacity to be with the rawness of groundlessness? This is the training ground. This is where you develop the capacity that will serve you in the ultimate transition of death. The oral instructions passed down through the Tibetan lineages emphasize something that rarely makes it into books. The most important preparation for death is living with awareness, kindness, and integrity. Accumulating merit through generosity, refraining from harm, cultivating positive qualities of mind. These activities shape the momentum of consciousness that will carry forward. If your mind is habitually anxious, grasping, and self-centered, that's the landscape you'll wander in the Bardo. If your mind has been trained in compassion, spaciousness, and recognition of emptiness, those qualities will naturally manifest. This isn't reward or punishment from an external judge. It's the simple functioning of cause and effect in the realm of consciousness. Let me share something Thupten Jinpa often points out. The genius of Tibetan Buddhism is its integration of philosophy and practice, of analytical reasoning and direct experience. You don't just intellectually accept that phenomena are empty of inherent existence. You investigate this through logical analysis, examining how things arise dependently based on causes and conditions. Then you sit in meditation and observe directly how your own thoughts and perceptions arise and dissolve, lacking any solid core. This twofold approach, analytical meditation and resting meditation, prepares the mind to recognize what's actually happening, rather than being swept away by conceptual projections. This is precisely what you need in the Bardo when overwhelming visions arise, the capacity to recognize them as mind's display rather than solid reality. For those of you interested in the actual practice, here's what genuine teachers recommend. Start with basic meditation, training in mindfulness and awareness. Develop ethical conduct, reducing harm and increasing benefit to others. Study the teachings on emptiness and dependent origination until they make sense not just intellectually, but experientially. If you feel called to Vajrayana practice, find an authentic teacher from an established lineage and receive proper instruction. Don't just read about deity yoga or phowa, the practice of consciousness transference. These are advanced techniques that require qualified guidance. And perhaps most importantly, work with your mind right now. Notice how you react to change and uncertainty. Notice how you grasp at pleasant experiences and push away unpleasant ones. Notice the suffering this causes. This noticing, this simple awareness, is the foundation of all Bardo practice. What you've discovered today are not just corrections to popular misconceptions. You've encountered an invitation to practice that can transform your relationship with life and death. The 7 lies we've dismantled. The idea that Bardo teachings are only about death, that anyone can use them without training, that they're a spiritual insurance policy, that they describe a psychedelic-like experience, that the deities are external beings, that you can strategize through them, and that they represent a universal death experience. These distortions have kept seekers on the surface of something profoundly deep. Now you have the opportunity to go deeper, to engage with these teachings as they were intended, as a practical path of awakening. Which of these 7 lies had you believing something false about the Tibetan Bardo? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights and questions create a community of genuine practice. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now to continue this journey of authentic Buddhist teaching, free from New Age distortion and commercialization. Share this video with anyone who's been curious about Tibetan Buddhism, but hasn't found trustworthy sources. The most precious gift you can offer is pointing someone toward genuine Dharma. The path is open. The teachings are available. The only question is whether you'll practice.